There are some betrayals that happen in arguments, and then there are the ones that happen in silence. The kind where you fall asleep next to someone who has already decided you won't wake up. Inside a quiet 2-story home in Hanahan, South Carolina, a woman slept peacefully in the bedroom she had been redesigning for months. Fabric samples were folded neatly downstairs. Renovation sketches rested on the kitchen table. Paint swatches leaned against the wall in the garage. It was supposed to be a new chapter. Her name was Caitlyn. She believed in building things slowly, carefully. She worked from home, loved the quiet rhythm of suburban mornings, and poured her energy into the house she shared with her husband. Friends said she talked about lighting fixtures and flooring patterns the way some people talk about vacations. And always nearby was Bailey May, her golden Labrador, loyal, gentle, protective in the softest way, the kind of dog that slept at the foot of the bed and followed her from room to room during the day. It was a home built on routine, and routine feels safe. What Caitlyn didn't know was that the person closest to her had already detached from the life she was still investing in. While she was choosing backsplash tiles, he was choosing something else entirely. In the days before that morning, Matthew Speck had been living a double life. Not in the dramatic sense of secret identities, but in quiet calculations. He had reconnected with an old romantic interest. He had started imagining a different future, one without legal battles, without dividing property, without financial loss. Divorce would have cost him. Starting over would have cost him, and he did not want to pay. The house in Eagle Landing wasn't just a home. It was an asset, a piece of stability, something he didn't want to split, sell, or surrender. To Caitlyn, it was sanctuary. To Matthew, it was leverage. And leverage can turn love into liability. In the early hours before dawn, the house was still. No footsteps in the hallway, no doors opening, no shattered glass, just 3 living beings inside: Caitlyn, Bailey May, and the man who had already made a decision. When the shots were fired, there was no chaos, no screaming neighbors, no barking alarm that echoed through the street. Bailey May did not sound an alert. She did not lunge. She did not attack. Because the person holding the weapon wasn't a stranger. It was someone she trusted. The first bullet ended Caitlyn's life before she could defend herself. She had been asleep. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. The second ended Bailey's. The dog lay in her usual spot by the bed, close enough to protect, close enough to love, close enough to be eliminated. Hours later, when the call finally went out to emergency dispatch, the voice on the other end trembled. Matthew Speck claimed intruders had broken in, claimed they had attacked him and his wife, claimed he had fought for survival. Police arrived to a house that looked undisturbed. No forced entry. No broken windows. No splintered door frames. Inside, nothing had been ransacked. Electronics were in place. Wallets untouched. Jewelry undisturbed. If robbery had been the motive, it had been a remarkably selective one. Upstairs, Caitlyn lay in bed. Bailey lay at her feet. Matthew greeted officers with blood on his clothes and shallow cuts across his forearms and abdomen.
He said he fought them off. He said they fled. But the house told a different story. Every door was locked from the inside. Every window sealed.
There were no footprints, no signs of multiple people moving through the home, no defensive blood patterns suggesting chaos. The wounds on Matthew's body raised quiet alarms. They were shallow, controlled, placed in areas easily reached by his own hand. Forensic specialists would later describe them as hesitation-style injuries, deliberate, measured, non-lethal. The blood spatter on his clothing lacked the randomness expected in a violent struggle. There were no defensive cuts on his hands, no gunpowder residue indicating close combat with a shooter. The more investigators studied the scene, the more it felt contained, almost staged. And then came the digital trail. Phones do not lie the way people do. In the days before Caitlyn's death, Matthew's search history took a dark turn. He wasn't browsing casually. He was researching methods, reading discussions about staging crimes, exploring toxicology, looking at escape routes. These searches weren't old. They were recent, late at night, while Caitlyn was still alive in the next room. The timestamps kept deeper than any confession. When detectives asked about intruders, Matthew's descriptions shifted, heights changed, clothing details wavered, the narrative bent under pressure. But what remained consistent was his concern for himself, his pain, his version. Meanwhile, 2 lives had ended in a room that showed no evidence of strangers. As investigators dug further, motive emerged not in dramatic revelation, but in quiet testimony. An ex-girlfriend described conversations about a future together. A co-worker recalled Matthew asking practical questions about property division in the event of a spouse's death. Not separation, death. Divorce meant selling the house, splitting assets, legal battles, financial loss. Death meant inheritance, the illusion of tragedy without the inconvenience of negotiation. When confronted with the contradiction, chasing intruders through a house locked from the inside, Matthew faltered. The timeline twisted. Explanations grew abstract. Phantoms. Shock. Confusion. But logic doesn't bend for emotion. Ballistics confirmed both Caitlyn and Bailey were shot with the same weapon. The angles suggested the shooter stood still, calm, controlled. There was no evidence of panic, only precision. Investigators reconstructed what likely happened long before 5 a.m. The shots were fired earlier. There had been time for blood to begin drying, time to think, time to stage. After Caitlyn and Bailey were gone, the house became quiet again. Too quiet. Matthew moved through rooms carefully, selectively. He did not destroy what he planned to keep. He did not ransack what he valued.
Then, in front of a mirror, he inflicted shallow wounds upon himself, enough to appear victimized, not enough to endanger his life. Only after daylight began to approach did he make the call. By the time jurors saw the evidence in court, the illusion had unraveled completely. The prosecution didn't rely on theatrics, they relied on science. Forensic pathologists explained why the wounds were self-inflicted. Ballistics experts demonstrated why the shooter hadn't been moving. Digital analysts showed the search history that read like preparation notes. The defense suggested the absence of security footage proved nothing, but the absence of forced entry proved everything. 5 days of testimony later, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty. Premeditated homicide. Cruelty toward an animal. Unlawful use of a firearm. Caitlyn's family listened as the man they once welcomed into their lives was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Under state law, he could not benefit from what he had done. The home he tried to secure through violence would not remain his.
There is something uniquely disturbing about crime.
If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please like and subscribe, because every victim deserves a voice.